So now, as I said, I've got these bulkheads in place. I'm just going to bring it over, get it ready here, and then it just slots in just like that. Right, and I can line it up over here, bring it over. It's in both grooves in my bulkheads, and now I've got my pencil lines on my hull as well as my in-wall, and I've just lined them up. I'll take a spring clamp and put that in place. Okay, so now I'm just going to move over a little. I'm going to keep holding it so it doesn't pop off. This is another good time where safety glasses would be important because as you can see, the in-wall is a spring right now, and we've got epoxy sitting on it. So if it did pop off, there is the risk of epoxy coming off and you know, hitting me. And if it goes in my eye, then I'm going to be spending time washing epoxy out of my eye before going to the hospital instead of finishing the boat. And then once I'm better, I'm going to have to come back and try to fix my mistakes instead of just wearing safety glasses when I started. Okay, and once again, we want our hull to be, that is the strip hull, to be slightly above our in-wall. Because when I come back, I'm going to plane that down. I'm going to plane it to match and line up nice and smooth, and I'm going to sand it. So having the in-wall slightly below the top of the hull, you know, just by, well, like a 64th of an inch, that'll give me just enough that I can clean up the cedar strip hull and bring it down to the height of the in-wall. Okay, so we're going to use a lot of clamps right now to get this all done. And this is going to take me a little while. Okay, so I just finished clamping on the in-wall. The epoxy's still, we'll say, fresh. It's not dry, it's still curing. Now I'm going to go along and I'm going to put those screws in. So I'm using 1-inch brass screws. These are number 8 screws. And I'm just going to go along and put these in. So if you hear that noise that's coming off the drill as I'm working, that's if you've ever wondered why you can adjust the speed or the torque of your driver, you can turn it down so that you don't screw too far. You know, the screw will keep turning. So if you turn down the torque, it'll go until it's firm and then it'll stop. Of course, you need to know how much torque you actually need, but I'll let you figure that out. Okay, well that's the last one on this side. So now I need to leave the clamps on regardless of putting the screws in place. Simply I don't want that pressure of the Inwale springing back and I want to make sure that it's all nice and tight. Okay, so I'm going to let that sit clamped up for at least 24 hours to make sure it's good and hard. Okay, so now our Inwales are fully secured to the boat, and we've given it time for the epoxy to fully cure. As you've seen, I also have the screws in place. So the next step is to finally smooth off the top edge, and once that's done, then we'll be able to fit our deck into place. Okay, so you see I've got a deck blank here waiting, and while I was waiting for my Inwales to finish off, you know, I cut this to shape and got that all ready. Okay, so that's going to go up at the end. And yeah, so cleaning up the top edge, you can use a spoke shave or a planer. You can use you know, a rasp, I guess, if you took your time. But the only thing with a rasp is, you know, it's going to be very coarse, so you'll do a lot of sanding anyhow afterwards. Depending on how much of an edge you have, you might even want to use a random orbit sander and or a belt sander would do. Unless you're good at using a belt sander, I probably wouldn't recommend doing that, just because it's easy to gouge off. You've got to, you know, have some skill with it to get a nice finish. So I'm going to get going with that, and I'm going to just start with my planer and clean it up a little, and then we'll be good to go. Alright, so I just finished off trimming the gunnels so that the decks will fit into place, and I've got that all finished on both sides. It's all leveled up. Then I went over just quickly with the orbital sander all over just the top surface of the gunnels, and now I'm just going to go and plug the holes. Those are the screw holes that I put in when I installed the Inwales. Okay, so all I'm going to use is, I've got a plug cutter, but you can buy different types of plugs. I'm just going to use ash plugs for ash gunnels. I had considered using cherry because I'm going to highlight the deck with some cherry likely, and you know, that might stand out more, make it a little bit fancy, but in the end I decided that I'll just use some ash plugs for this one. Okay, so yeah, simple enough, right? Just take the plug, a little bit of glue, tap it in with the hammer, and let it sit for an hour or two, and then go along and sand it smooth. There's only one other step that we need to do with the gunnels to finish off the installation. Well, two steps really. I'm going to go over it quickly with the orbital sander. Probably use 80 grit, and then I'll go over with some 100 grit sandpaper and just sand by hand. Then I'm going to just use some epoxy, just clear epoxy, and I'm going to brush it on just to seal it everywhere. Alright, now if you install the bulkheads, then you're going to want to make sure that those are all properly sealed, because the next step is to put the decks on, so you'll want to make sure that everything's ready at the deck ends. Now, if you go to buy your plugs, likely they won't have ash, so you probably want to use, if you want it to match, you probably want to use something like oak, okay? Because white oak is very similar to ash in its grain. The color is going to be different, but regardless, the color is going to be slightly different because the plugs are going to be end grain, so they'll stand out a little bit.